Welcome to Protect, Suicide Prevention Training Podcast for Healthcare Professionals. I'm Manaan, consultant psychiatrist, founder, and head of faculty at Progress Guide.
Good day and welcome to episode 25. I'm Mahi, your host, and with me is Manaan, head of faculty for Progress Guide. Today we will discuss the third of the 5 borderline conversations, short-term versus long-term. How does your care decision impact each time window? We ended the last episode with the beautiful words of William Ernest Henley, "I am the master of my fate, I'm the captain of my soul." Fitting words to end an episode in which we would discuss the dilemma of empowerment versus containment. Empowerment, the goal of every mental health professional when supporting a person in suicidal distress, is to capture hope, reconnect the person with their strengths, and recreate self-belief and agency in the process, make themselves irrelevant in the person's life, so that they can remain the master of their fate and the captain of their soul. This can be easier said than done, particularly in the face of the intense suicidal distress of a person in a borderline crisis.
It is the intensity of distress that is often projected onto the professional that causes immense anxiety in care providers. Something we have covered in detail on the first of the 5 conversations, advice versus actions. If our advice to a person in borderline crisis is, face your fears, you can navigate through this difficult time, suicidal urges do subside, and you need to learn to overcome the anxiety by going through it. There is no other way. If that is your advice, then you need to role model it in the decision you make and the actions you take, or else your advice is just empty words. This led to the discussion about empowerment and containment. If you operate from the principle of better be safe than sorry and lean more towards containment, one has to ask, better for whom? You as the professional or the patient? Containment may be necessary at times, but surely the goal is to empower the person to manage the trials and tribulations of living a life that is meaningful despite their borderline personality disorder and the challenges that brings.
I'm assuming today's episode, short-term versus long-term, builds on these 2 previous discussions.
Yes, it does.
And it relates to the third aware factor, agenda.
Exactly. Remember, we have discussed agenda in detail in episode 17. As an assessor, we asked you to pause and think, how often are you responding to an agenda that you have perceived in an assessment that may be skewing the clinical decision or the outcome? Remember, an agenda is a desire or motivation to achieve a particular outcome. Sometimes they are clearly stated, and at other times, it's implied or perceived by the assessor. What we found in the AWARE study was that once you pick up an agenda, it begins to influence information processing, which, needless to say, impacts the decision you make.
And that wasn't specific to borderline personality disorder?
No, it wasn't. Assessors, as I said, perceive agendas all the time. In fact, that is one of the key clinical skills that a practitioner needs to develop, to establish what is it that will meet the needs of the person in front of them. Why are they here? What we did see was that assessors seem to look more kindly on agendas that were out in the open, things that they could discuss honestly and candidly. But the stance often became less compassionate and in some cases harder and even adversarial if the assessors felt that they were being somehow forced into a corner to meet an unstated agenda the patient had or their family had.
Like someone angling for an admission?
Yes, and that is where the whole discussion regarding BPD becomes relevant. Clearly, they are angling for an admission because they believe that is where they will be safe and they cannot trust themselves to navigate their distress without putting themselves in harm's way. However, it is hardly ever spoken of in this way. The so-called angling takes expression as statements which sound like, if I'm discharged, I'm going to walk into traffic. And sometimes you might even get to the point where the patient might say, you will be responsible if I end up going back to the bridge again and jumping off.
The clinical interaction sounds like a power struggle.
This is not unusual for the conversations to pan out in this fashion, particularly when agendas are not aligned. In your thought bubble, if you have got Jill is angling for an admission, I need to keep her out of hospital, this will rapidly become adversarial in nature. The assessor may not even be consciously aware of their mental stance, but Jill quickly perceives the stance. So remember, people with borderline personality are hyper aware of abandonment and rejections. That is one of those criterion for the diagnosis. So when they perceive the stance in a clinician who is discounting how unsafe they are currently feeling, they feel a pressure to prove their suicidal distress. And that in itself escalates the risk in the situation.
This reminds me that for our new listeners, we should do a quick recap of Jill.
Yes, actually, we should.
So, Jill is a 30-year-old female who was presented to ED in suicidal crisis. The background is that she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder a few months back. She is case managed by the Mood Community team and awaiting DBT. She's had multiple crisis admissions in the past that have been generally unhelpful with increasing self-harm and aggression on the ward that requires constant observation and seclusion to manage safety. On assessment, you establish that there is a worsening suicidal ideation in the context of recent relationship conflict. She's feeling hopeless and wants to end it all. She's seeking safety and containment through admission.
So, following the assessment, you call the on-call consultant to discuss Jill's presentation. Given Jill's past history of hospital admissions, which were generally unhelpful, whereas self-harming escalated, particularly just before discharge, a decision is made to avoid admission. The consultant strongly recommends to you that Jill should engage with community team and avoid admission if possible. You were initially concerned about Jill getting highly dysregulated when she's told that she will be sent back home. You have opened the conversation with Jill using the in-parts technique, sharing with Jill your thoughts and your dilemma. You have put your cards on the table, saying part of you is worried about Jill maintaining her safety in the community, but the other part knows that that is what recovery entails. Jill has to face her fears and learn that anxiety of feeling unsafe can be mastered. Jill is absolutely aghast and tells you that she can't believe that she's telling you that she's worried about keeping herself safe and you just don't care and are sending her home. You then go on to elaborate the different approaches to providing support. You use the care compass to draw out the two axes, the x-axis for Jill's fragility and resilience, and the y-axis for your clinical focus, which stretches from safety at one end to self-reliance at the other end. You attempt to draw Jill into a conversation about containment and empowerment and help Jill understand why those whose struggles with suicidality is chronic, a large part of their recovery entails learning that suicidal urges can be mastered through one's internal coping strategies.
This is where we are. You are using the care compass to help Jill get on board for the journey ahead. So, Manaan, how might you go about it?
First things first, for a full description of the care compass, please listen to episodes 3 and 4. If you don't know what the care compass is, none of this will make any sense. So in the guidebook, the care compass is on page 10, and you can also see the image online at www.progress.guide on the podcast blog. When supporting someone who is feeling extremely fragile and may have presented to the ED or A&E, your initial focus has to be on maintaining safety, i.e. on the bottom left quadrant of prudent care. That does not mean that you admit everyone into an inpatient setting. Yes, some will need an admission because their risks are so high that crisis management and containment will take priority over empowerment. But the hope is that through the process of assessment and safety planning that follows each and every assessment, you will be able to help the person shift from the bottom left quadrant of prudent care, where the focus is on rediscovery of hope and one's strengths, to the top right quadrant of permissive care, where the focus is on resilience and recovery.
In terms of movements across quadrants, that is what you describe as positive risk-taking.
Yes, that's correct. For some, the initial focus may end up being containment, and they might need a short 3-day inpatient stay to move them from the prudent care, i.e. focus on safety and rediscovery, to permissive care, that is focus on resilience and recovery. But in most cases, your skills as an assessor and engager will need to be drawn on to help the person make the same move in a much shorter time window, say 3 to 4 hours. That will involve a thorough assessment, some brief interventions, decisions on the level of monitoring and who does the monitoring, and then step them down into the community.
And that is what you call the AIMS approach?
Yes, I guess at a later date, when we talk about designing suicide prevention pathways, we will talk about the AIMS approach in detail. So, AIMS stands for A is for assessment, I for intervention, M for monitoring, and S for step up or step down, meaning transition of care. We expect every practitioner to answer these 4 questions in every interaction. So, these questions are: question number 1, what further assessment is needed? Question number 2, what interventions need to be delivered? Question number 3, what monitoring is required? Question number 4, what actions need to be successfully undertaken before a step down, or what would indicate that a step up is needed? So these 4 questions have to be articulated clearly. It has to be written down properly in the plan, whether that be a plan of care or a care plan. And in these questions, when I use the word what, so for example, what further assessment, what interventions, what monitoring, what actions for step up or step down, that word what is also a proxy for who does it, where is it best done, when should it be done, etc. If all those 4 questions about assessment, interventions, monitoring, and step up or step down are reasonably answered, one will find that they can begin to address the high levels of anxiety that is present in any crisis situation. And by that, I don't mean just the anxiety in the person and the family, but your own anxiety as well. I have a feeling I have digressed from the original question and have sidetracked into AIMS. What were we actually talking about?
Positive risks. Moving from prudent care, where the focus is on safety and rediscovery of hope and strengths, to permissive care, where the focus is on resilience building and moving forward with one's recovery.
Of course. So yes, answering the 4 AIMS questions is the way in which you can operationalize this whole idea of positive risks. For example, if you have not fully formulated or articulated those 4 answers, you will find that the level of anxiety in Jill and her family would still be very high, and it will be akin to a move from prudent care to precarious care, where the care feels rushed, the patient does not feel ready and is not on board, and relational safety begins to break down.
So that is the move from prudent care, which is bottom left, to top left, precarious care, what you described in episodes 3 and 4 as risk-prone clinical decision-making.
It is quite interesting. The same decision can be positive risk or risk-prone based on the quality of the dialogue and the interaction with the person. Essentially, are you able to bring the person on board and get them and their family to play the part that they need to play to maintain safety? That is the critical part which decides, is this going to be a move from the bottom left to the top right into permissive care, or would it go straight up into precarious care?
There is also the move from prudent care, bottom left to bottom right, into prescriptive care, something you have described as risk-averse clinical decision-making.
Yes, this is the opposite scenario to risk-prone decision-making, where the person feels they are ready, the family feels they are ready, but the professional does not share that belief and feels that the focus still needs to be on safety. Under those circumstances, care could become prescriptive, and Jill might spend an awful lot of energy fighting the system to get out. Please do remember that there may be very good reasons why the clinician may feel that way due to past experience with Jill or patients similar to Jill.
So there are 3 different clinical decisions: those that involve positive risks, those that are risk-prone, and those that are risk-averse. Clearly, you don't want to be risk-prone.
True. So you have to get the person on board. But you also don't want to be risk-averse. If the focus is just on containment, then you are stifling the person's growth and self-belief. That is why it is so important to have the conversation with Jill in which you open up a window into your thinking to help Jill see why you're choosing community over inpatient. This is, by the way, the 4th borderline crisis conversation, which we'll pick up in the next episode, which relates to the aware factor of resources, that whole inpatient versus community conversation.
So when you say open up a window into your thinking, what does that mean? What will you actually tell someone like Jill?
With Jill, it is slightly easier as you have specific examples to draw on due to her known past history of previous admissions. So you can describe how care got restrictive with escalation in self-harming prior to discharge and the admission stretched out with very little therapeutic benefit. If anything, those short crisis admissions destroyed her trust in herself, trust in the system, trust in the professionals, and the seclusions and restraints that happened, they resulted in re-traumatizing.
So you'll be articulating the case for not admitting?
I tend to think of this part as a two-step process. First, you need to put the competing agendas on the table, make the implicit explicit, state the obvious, and make Jill and her family see that we are on different hills. Clearly, Jill, you want an admission and containment and to feel safe, and I feel what you need is enhanced community support to support you to believe in yourself that these suicidal urges can be navigated. You have what it takes to get through these, and once you get through them, your confidence in yourself will grow.
So the different hills is the containment versus empowerment discussion?
Yes, you're building on it. You're making obvious the different agendas. Jill wants to be safe, you want her to be self-reliant. Jill wants inpatient care, you want community care. This initial first step of shining a light on the different hills is essential to move to the next step of showing that the hills share overlapping grounds, that there is a shared objective.
Okay, you've put it to Jill that the two of you are pulling in different directions.
Well, we want to avoid that, but it has to be done with honesty and candor. You might seem to be pulling in different directions, but actually you are not. Both hills stand on the same grounds. Jill wants safety in the here and now. You want safety in the here and now too. But you know that every time if Jill presents in crisis and you admit her, Jill will never develop the internal and external coping strategies she needs to regulate her emotions and affect. So you are talking about taking positive risks and make it safer in the longer run by focusing on resilience.
So Jill's focus or agenda is short-term safety, and your agenda is long-term safety.
Exactly. But it is a difficult one for Jill to grasp because her anxiety is overwhelming her at the moment. So you will need some time to have this supportive, sensitive conversation to help Jill see that if we keep admitting you, Jill, every single time you present, you are learning that in order to feel safe, I have to take risks. I have to self-harm. I have to cut more frequently, or I have to cut deeper, or I have to take or threaten to take bigger risks. So although an admission reduces the risk in the short term, it actually increases the risk in the longer term as you are taking bigger and bigger risks to prove your distress to the people who are supporting you and the professionals who are involved in your care.
This must be a very difficult conversation to have if Jill is feeling overwhelmed.
Yes, it is. That is why I keep saying, use the in-parts technique to help Jill see that part of me does want to take the easy route and admit. You will feel safe, I will feel safe, everyone goes home happy, other than you, of course, who ends up in hospital. But I know, Jill, that the easy way will be the wrong way, because that is a short-term solution, like a band-aid. My responsibility to you is much harder than just saying, admit. My responsibility to you involves helping you see and believe that you can overcome these moments of crisis. And I want to work with you to figure out what further assessment, what further intervention, what level of monitoring is needed, and what is the best option in the community that can help you through your crisis, as well as identify when might we need to step up for an inpatient admission. I know you believe that it is the here and now that you need the help, but I need you to work with our community teams to test out whether we can support you to stay at home. You see, the issue is for people like Jill, they have had a lifetime of fighting against the system, trying to get into hospital. In many ways, we don't have a step up or a step down service. We have a step back service. So when people with borderline personality disorder present in crisis, every bit of the system says, oh, not my problem, not my problem. So people are stepping back. So it is actually quite difficult for Jill to trust the intentions of the professional that is what they're trying to achieve. Help them in the longer term, and that helping in the longer term actually makes the shorter run also safer, even if it feels unsafe in the here and now.
So let me summarize. Admission might contain the risks in the short run, but will escalate risks in the long run, as the person's risk-taking is reinforced through the desired consequence of hospitalization.
Wow, that is an excellent summary.
Well, I have just regurgitated your words from the workbook on page 20.
For a moment, I thought, gosh, you absolutely nailed this one.
Well, I have got it, because I put in my own flavor. I added in the word desired, making it the desired consequence of hospitalization. Maybe you should add the word desired in the next edition of the workbook.
Actually, that's a good point. Yes, it is Jill's desired outcome, but not yours. And your two-step challenge is step one, that the desired outcome of the assessment she has and you have are different in terms of admission. So you need to be able to speak about that. And step two, you need to highlight that the desire for safety is the same, just that she's thinking short term and you are thinking long term.
Just a thought, because I know you talk a lot in your courses about moving from top to tap. Is there a risk that you might come across as a bit condescending? You are the expert, so you are thinking long term, and poor Jill is only the patient, so she is thinking short term.
Well, you are dramatizing it a bit when you say poor Jill is only the patient, but I get the point you are making. There's always the risk that you might come across as condescending or you come across as patronizing. It depends on how big a window you open into your mind, because it is the words you use. You can go a step further in your validation by explaining, Jill, given your extreme anxiety, it does not surprise me that your focus is on surviving the here and now, just making it through today, so you are forced to think short term. Whereas I am a step removed from you, I am walking with you, but not in your shoes. So I will never be able to feel the anxiety in the way you do. So I'm able to think a bit longer term and think through how my decisions today can either be enabling for you in the longer run or actually disabling for you. How my decisions can make it safe in the short term, but unsafe in the long term as you take more and more risks to express your distress and seek containment through admission. Or I can take positive risks today. It will feel unsafe in the short term, but in the longer run, you will learn that you can survive these anxious moments by drawing on your strengths and your natural circle of support.
That is a long-winded answer to a simple question, Manaan. So, in short, you can come across as condescending.
Stop scoring points. You're right. These are extremely nuanced conversations. That is why it is so important to practice them in simulation workshops. You learn through your mistakes.
This is the Critical Crisis Conversations course for BPD.
Yes, we get professional actors and facilitators to repeatedly practice these conversations, very similar to the 7 Safe Steps program. Of course, this is much more advanced and much more expensive. So for experienced professionals looking to fine-tune their skills, we do the aware factors in detail, understand creep, crash, crawl, and through evolving scenarios, practice each of these conversations. And the actors give you real-time feedback as to what worked well and even better if. It is done in a very supportive way to build up a professional's confidence.
How expensive is it?
It is quite expensive. Well, it depends on a number of factors. Is it face-to-face or online? How many students? The number of students, that dictates the number of actors we need to get, the number of facilitators we need to get. Is it a standard one-day program for 24 to 28 participants with 4 actors and 4 facilitators? Depending on whether we do it in one day or over 2 days, well, the cost could anywhere be from 30,000 to 50,000 Aussie dollars. Of course, train-the-trainer programs in which we hand a license to an organization with our intellectual property rights are much more expensive. But depending on the budget of the organization, we can normally create a program for them. The sum taken in isolation may seem large, but you know what? If each professional who attends this course manages to avoid 1-2 month admission and, at a bare minimum rate of $1,000 a night, a 2-month admission is like $60,000. So the course can save you 50 times the figure. If you have 24 to 25 participants in the very first or 2 months, that is. It is money well spent, not to mention the impact on people's lives and how do you put a figure to a life that may be saved through a critical conversation. Well, that is one for managers to mull over as they think about pushing quality up and bringing costs down all at the same time.
Yes, how do you put a price on the life of a loved one? That's a poignant note to pull this episode to an end. Short term versus long term. The two can feel like competing demands, but if through one of the critical conversations that we've been discussing, we can get Jill to see that your goal is aligned to hers, that you want to create safety in the longer term by taking positive risks in the here and now, you may be able to heal any ruptures in relational safety.
The critical issue with the agenda factor in AWARE is how quickly patients with BPD perceive rejection and abandonment, and that then plays into their risk-taking as they attempt to prove that they do need containment now. They need to be kept safe. You have to keep me safe or else you are responsible. This conversation about short-term and long-term preempts the other one about who is going to be responsible for my death, one that involves an unhelpful power struggle over resources and feelings, something we will pick up in the next episode. There is a quote by Garrison Wynn that I love. He's an author and a motivational speaker. He says, long-term success is the result of relationships built on a foundation of trust. People get more value from those they trust. And relational safety is all about trust. Of course, he was speaking in a different context. Whatever be the conversation, it has to be genuine. In Empathy in Action, we talk about the three components: cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, and empathic concern. This third component, empathic concern, that is the bit around the genuine desire to help. If you have it, it will shine through.
These conversations are all about building relationships. Relationships as the foundation of long-term safety, and through the conversation, helping the person see that you are genuine in your desire to help them overcome the challenges life is posing, both in the here and now, but also in the longer-term future. Short versus long-term is one of those critical conversations where you can help a person with BPD see your genuine commitment to them. If you can get this across, you will win them over for the short term, as well as help them play their part in managing their safety, and it all depends on whether they feel rejected or supported. Have you ever had a scenario like Jill's where you have needed to explain what you were doing and why? How did it pan out? Did you win the person over and help them see your commitment to supporting them? Based on what you've heard, what changes will you make to such interactions? If you have specific questions, please do email us at admin@progress.guide. Share your musings with us. Tweet your thoughts and tag #GuideProgress. It helps get the word out about the podcast to more professionals and supports progress to practice. You can access all the transcripts at www.progress.guide. You can connect with Manaan on LinkedIn or follow our LinkedIn page by searching on LinkedIn for progress.guide. We are also on Twitter and YouTube. Our Twitter handle is @GuideProgress. As usual, please do follow the podcast. There'll be weekly episodes every Friday and share it with your colleagues. Your ratings will help get the word out, so please don't forget to rate us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Audible, or whichever channel you are listening on. Next week, we will go deeper into inpatient care versus community care and certain innovative approaches that combine both. Something we thought we might have been able to tackle today, but we did not get around to it, so we will do it in the next episode. Challenges in supporting people with borderline personality disorder is their common knowledge and skills deficits. Given severe borderline personality disorder has a standardized mortality rate of 45.1, it is a critical area for suicide prevention. Helping healthcare professionals fine-tune their practice in this area is an essential step in creating a workforce that delivers high-quality care for people in suicidal distress. Remember, together we can make a difference. Thank you for joining us today and keep spreading the word.